Right? So you can take a look at security guards. There's an enormous number of these guys doing all kinds of things all over the country who are protecting property, protecting people, making sure that people aren't rude to other people on private property. There's all kinds of things they're doing. So this already exists. Okay? Now, once you realize this already exists, it is not too hard to realize that there could be some more of it. Right? Because if it's already, say, 60% of all the police in the country, why couldn't it be 70%? Why couldn't it be 80%? Right? And again, of course, why is the people turn to private security in the first place? Do you have your own question, or let's see? Yes?
Would you say, though, like, fundamental difference between, say, security guards and police for common areas, while security guards are in very specific locations like malls, shopping centers? That's kind of the difference we're dealing with. How do we move the security personnel into the public field to participate in the private sector?
Well, let's see. I wouldn't call them just like narrow specific places. This is most of the country. Right? So, I mean, there's the streets are a small area of the country. Just in terms of surface area, this is a pretty small area. But I think we can come back to this in a little bit. Let's see. Did someone? Yeah. Yes. I'm not sure about that. Does anyone know about this? Okay. All right. Now, but so on the question, how is it that you would actually, or what would cause the percentage of private security to get up to a higher percentage? Well, so why does anyone bother hiring these guys in the first place? Why does anyone pay perfectly good money for security when your taxes provide protection for you?
More efficient.
It's more efficient? I'd have an even more how about an even more basic answer for why anyone bothers to pay for these guys? Wait, what's that?
The government doesn't do it.
Yeah. Well, they don't do what you want, right? If the mall said, we want to have a bunch of guys around here doing stuff for us, well, you may be paying millions of dollars in property taxes every year, but your millions don't actually entitle you to that. Right? So if you want more more protection than the government will give you, the government will give you, right? And again, so you pay your taxes. They decide how much you're entitled to. Well, if what they think that you are entitled to is less than you would like to have, then you go and pry open your wallet and you pay for it yourself. And this is why security is already at 60%. So if you think about the kinds of things that would lead this percentage to rise from, say, 60% to higher, like what are some things that would cause that to rise? Well, let's see. If people hire them in the first place because government isn't doing it for them, what would get people to hire more? Yeah. Yes, if government was doing even less. Right? So if you were to cut down on either the raw numbers of the police force, or just to say that the police are not going to handle, the police are not going to deal with certain areas. Okay, so right now, for example, in many apartment complexes, you have private security. Right. On the other hand, what often happens right now is when a developer builds a large number of houses in an area, once they are done building, then they will generally deed the street over to the local government in order to get the local government to provide the police. Right? Now, what would happen if local governments were to say, well, you can deed the street over to us if you want, it doesn't mean you're getting any police? What would be likely to happen in that case? Yes. In this case, when you are selling homes to people and they say, so what do you do for protection around here? And if the developer said, I don't know. All right. That would not be a great selling point. Generally, when you are trying to buy a house, people are trying to explain why you're going to be very satisfied with the experience. Saying, I don't know, to what are we going to do if there's any danger here is not a very compelling answer. So it is likely that what would happen is that homeowners associations, which right now are set up, that would at least be part of the answer. Say, look, well, what's going to happen is that there's going to be a homeowners association here, and the homeowners association will be responsible for contracting for security. Okay, so that's something. Now, some other ways that the percentage of police that are provided for by provided privately would increase if there were classes of calls that the police wouldn't answer. So if the police say we don't answer cat caught up a tree calls, then people are no longer to bother having the police for them. Now that's a very, very, very mild issue, but if you just go down the list of things that people call police for and say, all right, well, we can draw a line through this. We're not going to have the police handle calls like that. Well, those are the things that are going to lead more people to turn to more security and increase the percentage of security that is provided privately. So something else you could do, say, look, we are not going to send the police for a routine theft, for a routine burglary call. Okay, so in that case, you got no one else to call, so you wind up calling security instead. Or we're only going to send the police if there's actual violence going on. That would reduce the role of the police further. Now, the point here is simply that these things could be privatized. I mean, we can talk more about whether it would be a good idea, but there's no doubt that more of the police could be privatized, and that this would in fact happen if the police were doing less. Right? The reason why people rely upon the police is because they can rely upon them. Just like a very simple way of getting more people to go to private school is if public schools were worse or public schools did less. These are the kinds of things that lead people to go and go to the market instead. Right? And again, so why are people doing public schools if private schools are better? See, public schools are free, right? Yes, free at the margin, right? They're free at the margin. The key economic point. This means that you've already been taxed whether or not you use them, and then the additional marginal cost of using them is zero. Okay, so this is the way that government often works: is first it taxes you, and then it says, there are some services that you can have if you want them of the amount and quality that we decide. Right? So if they were to hand out less, then people would turn to the market instead. Okay, all right. So that's police, and I think that security guards are sufficiently visible that it's hard for people to deny that we could have more of them, because we already have a lot. So certainly they could do more than they're currently doing. What about when you move over to courts? Okay, so what if you move over to courts? So we already did police. How about courts here? Okay. So it is not all that often that we personally see a private court. I don't know if anyone ever been at the mall and you've seen a private court going on. Not often. But there is a reason for this. How many of you have ever actually been inside of a real courtroom? Really, most people. Anyone ever looked at a trial or done jury duty or something like that? All right. So these things are going on. So you may wonder, what functions that are currently provided by courts could be privatized? Well, once again, my hint is what court or court-like functions are already privatized? Yes?
On college campuses, a lot of times you'll have like a judicial board or
that's right. There'll be the honor code board, which, yes, I admit I always avoid. I handle out punishment more directly. Yes, Ed Stringham is the master of this, where he told me several times you catch students cheating, and then you bring them in and say, well, I've got you cheating, I've got proof, you've Googled it, this essay is copied straight off the internet, so you can either receive an F in this class and shut up about it, or we could go to the honor board. Okay, so an even more direct approach, but yeah, a lot of schools have this. Now, if you've ever signed a contract, you will be aware, or if you've ever signed and read, actually, that's key. We all sign many, many contracts. Anytime you click I agree on an internet website, it's like a contract, but how often do you actually read what is there? If you're like me, virtually never. But if however, I have read, I often do read contracts in that, so when there's a contract I'm signing with my wife, she's a lawyer, she's actually reading for the substance, and I'm saying, oh look, you're not allowed to have dogs in this complex. Like, we don't have a dog, but a parakeet's okay. Why is that? That's interesting. We could get a parakeet if we were so inclined, which we're not. Okay. Now, one thing, if you go and read a contract in its entirety, it is very common that you'll see there's a clause saying that this contract is subject to binding arbitration. Okay. And what is binding arbitration? It is it amounts to a private court. It's a place where if there's a dispute over the contract, the parties are contractually agreeing not to go and take it to the government court. Instead, you will go to an arbitrator, right? An arbitrator, or an arbitration organization, such as the American Arbitration Association. Let's see, it's 3 A's. American Association. Do you remember, Ed? One of those. So anyway, what these people do is the same kind of thing that a court does, only with a few differences. Like, it doesn't take forever. First of all, it doesn't take very long to actually have a dispute arbitrated, so you can get on with your life. And the proceeding itself is shorter and is much cheaper than an actual trial would be. Okay, so these are all differences. And again, why do people pay good money to go and get some arbitrator when they could just wait a few years and duke it out in the government court? Why? What are these people thinking? Don't they understand that the public courts are free? Yes, they do understand this. However, as you may learn if you study economics, a lot of free stuff just isn't worth it. There's a lot of stuff that you can get for free, but who wants it? There's free street parking, great. You also have to search around for several hours to find any. On the other hand, there's a paid parking garage of the kind that my dad would rather slit his own wrists than go into. However, it is there. Yes, I remember it was only a couple years ago that I grew up in Los Angeles, and anytime I wanted to do anything fun that was actually in the city of Los Angeles, I was in a suburb, my dad would say, "God damn it, we're not going to downtown LA." And it was only a few years ago I found out why we were never allowed to go, which is I told him, "Hey, Dad, my wife and I are going to go to downtown LA." And he looked at me like I was crazy. He said, "Where are you going to park?" He said, "In a parking garage?" And he's like, "So you're going to pay for parking?" Like, "I'm going to pay for parking." Looked at me like, "You are not my son." So some people have a lot of trouble paying for something they can get for free. However, the study of economics often helps people realize that free stuff isn't really free. You're still paying with your time and your pain and your suffering and your inconvenience. And this is the logic of going to arbitrators, where you go to someone who will get the job done more quickly and at a lower indirect expense. Because remember, the government court doesn't charge to be in the court. However, that doesn't mean that it's free to be there. You need to hire your lawyer and spend all this time. On the other hand, the arbitrator charges a fee in order to be there. He's not paid for by taxes. However, it generally winds up being much cheaper, right? Which gets us a little ahead, but in a large part because the rules of arbitration are different. Okay, and right now, arbitration is a huge industry in the United States. It is standard in business contracts to specify that that either you have binding arbitration or at least you go to the arbitrator first in the hope of being able to solve it. Now, one interesting thing that goes on with arbitration, right, is that binding rule. Okay, so often the laws will say binding, but here is one of the main reasons why arbitration is not bigger than it currently is. Suppose you sign some binding arbitration, or you sign a binding arbitration clause saying that if there is a discrimination lawsuit of this firm, we agree to submit to binding arbitration. Okay, well, suppose then that an employee goes and has a grievance. He goes and takes his employer to arbitration. The arbitrator rules against him. What can he do despite the fact that the contract says binding arbitration? Yeah. Yes, he could go to the court anyway. Go to court anyway, and very often the judge will say, look, this binding arbitration clause is contrary to public policy. And in fact, a judge might say, and this quite accurately, if we allowed people to sign these binding arbitration clauses and we really enforced it, this would almost allow people to invalidate the law all by themselves. Right? So for example, suppose that you're an employer and you never want to be sued by your employees. What kind of an arbitration clause might you put in? How about any labor dispute between you and me will be resolved by my brother-in-law's arbitration firm? Okay. Now, you might say no one would sign such a contract. Would you sign such a contract if someone is offering you a $100,000 job as long as you put your name on this line? Yeah, I would. I'm not planning on suing anybody. So, now, if you've studied some economics, you realize, oh, that's interesting. So this is a right that we're given that most people would be delighted to contract away for. So you'll give me like $1,000 extra worth of salary, and in exchange I have to give up my right to sue you, which I wasn't going to do anyway? That sounds pretty sweet.